Hello again and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pillowcase. I know, not exactly quilting, but you're still using a needle and thread. And hey, since you've learned how to quilt and use needle and thread, why not have some other fun projects too? I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful pillowcase. Pillowcases are so much fun to make, especially if you're using novelty fabrics, because then you can make it to fit the person. Haven't noticed? We got a little wine theme going on here. So we got a beautiful cuff, some accent, and the pillowcase, the main part. So stay tuned and I'm going to show you how to make this wonderful pillowcase in either a standard or a king size. Hi, I'm Wendy J. Haney and welcome to my channel. I'm here to show you that quilting, or just sewing, does not need to be intimidating and it is so much fun. So stay tuned and I'll show you how. As I said, pillowcases are so much fun, especially if you use novelty fabric. Well, if you followed me on Facebook, or maybe I've mentioned it a time or two, I kind of like my wine. So today I'm going to make a pillowcase out of wine fabric. Yep, I found these in my stash and I think it'll be great. I am going to make a king size pillowcase. What you're going to need to do this is you're going to need your main fabric. This is going to be my main fabric. And if you're doing a standard pillow, you need 3/4 of a yard or 24 inches. Otherwise, for a king, you're going to need a yard. So I've got a yard of fabric here. Then you need your accent fabric. Your accent fabric, you really just need a 2-inch strip of fabric. Key thing is it needs to be the full width of the fabric and it needs to be straight. So usually they say if you're buying fabric, get 1/8 of a yard, which is about 4.5 inches. If you've got yardage already, then cut it, square it up, and you need 2 inches. Then your cuff fabric, and you need 1/3 of a yard of this. Once again, key thing is I've already got my yard cut of that, so we're going to cut the cuff fabric. And the cuff fabric, I need 12 inches of it, and we're going to square it up. That's the biggest thing with all of these. Keep losing my rulers. Seems to be a trend. Key thing that will help through all of this is making sure your fabric pieces are all squared up when you cut them. That way, because basically you're going to layer these all together. Okay, so now I've got a nice square edge over here. And now we need 12 inches of it. So, key thing is, this is a 6-inch ruler and this is a 6-inch ruler. So I'm going to put this ruler over here and even it up on the edge. Keep it straight at my edge down there. Put the other one there also. This is straight all the way across here. Okay, there's my 12 inches of my cuff fabric. I really should get a different blade, shouldn't I? It's just one thread. Okay, so there's my cuff and my accent piece. This was in my stash. So all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut, instead of dealing with the entire strip of fabric, I know I can safely trim off about 2.5 inches. I'm going to flip this around and square it up to the 2 inches that I need. There we go. Okay, now we have all of our fabric. What we're gonna do is, what I do is I go to the ironing board and I press all of these. I press them, I get my middle seam pressed out of there, and then come back and for each of these, match your salvages, because you're gonna wanna leave your salvages on, match your salvages up, and basically fold it in half. Fold it in half, finger press it, and then I actually For your accent piece, mark it on the outside, because you're going to ultimately, so we're going to mark that on the outside so that I can see it. And don't use a fusion pen, which is going to iron off. Just mark it, because this is all going to get into the seams anyway, so you're not going to see it. So there we go. So we're going to mark that. And on the cuff fabric, once you press it and fold it together, mark your, on both the top and the bottom. So fold it in half and get your mark on the top of the fabric. Mark your middle, both on the top and the bottom. And then on your main fabric, you're going to want to mark, this one's a little different. Once you get it folded, and if I can unfold it, once you get it folded, mark your middle on the wrong side of the fabric. Make sure you've got a good mark so you know where it's at. This is going to be important when we get to the next piece, where we're going to start layering all of these together. And the important thing is to layer them with the middle in mind, because we're not cutting off the salvages. And salvages with the fabric, you know, no piece of fabric is exactly the same. So this is an important step. So now I'm going to go iron and mark my middles. I have all my pieces pressed and marked. So my cuff, I have my centers marked. Basically what I did was, sometimes your salvages aren't even. So I take my fabric like this and I even up the edges and the bottom. And sometimes I'll flip it over and kind of use the salvage. And then I want the bottom, the bottom to be nice and even. Kind of hard to show on here. But key thing is, get your fabric, get that out of there, all squared up, nice and neat, squared up. Your edges are good. It's even on the bottom. And then I marked on the outside the middle, because I want that middle mark so I can see it on the outside. Okay? And on the main fabric, I did the same thing, but in that case, I marked the middle on the back of the fabric. Okay, the accent piece, I also did the same. The other thing you'll see that I did with my accent fabric is I folded it in half, wrong sides together. I took that 2-inch strip, folded in half, wrong sides together, so now I have a 1-inch strip of my accent fabric, and once again folded it in half and marked my middle. So now we're going to put all the pieces together. So we're going to take our cuff fabric and lay it out right side up. There's my middle. Then you're going to need some pins for this. Then you take your accent fabric, and there's my middle. I'm going to put it right there on top, matching my middles and doing a quick pin. Okay, so right now I'm just kind of placing them here and a pin in my middle. Then we take our main fabric. Key thing, when you're working with directional fabrics, you want them right side up, which made me just realize, okay, my cuff is going to be okay. For a minute there, I'm like, uh-oh, is my cuff fabric going to be upside down? It's kind of sort of bidirectional, so I'm going to double check that. But you want to look at your main fabric. If it's not directional, it really doesn't matter. But if it is directional, and this is, yes, this is directional. So I want the top of my fabric at the top where I'm pinning it. So otherwise, your pillowcase is going to look a little funky. So in this case, I'm going to take the middle that I marked, and this is why I had you mark it on the back of the fabric. It's because this is the one scenario where you're going to put the Well, actually, you're doing the same thing that you usually do. You have right sides together. So we're laying this fabric. Where? And how? There it is. I lost my middle for a minute. I'm gonna match my middle up again with the other pieces of fabric. There we go. Now I have my cuff, my accent, and my main fabric all lined up. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and stretch this out all the way, and I'm gonna match everything up and pin it nice and neatly. Then I'm gonna take it to the sewing machine and sew 1/8 of an inch through all of that, just a basting stitch. So I usually increase my stitch length to 4 or 5 and then baste it. You're going to have plenty of room when push comes to shove. So even if you only sew it 1/4 of an inch, you're gonna be fine. You won't run into it, running into the next seam we're gonna make. I'm gonna go do that, and then we'll take a look at the next step. Next step. I have mine basted, so we're all good with that. Key thing is making sure that you keep your cuff fabric out of the way. The last thing you want is to get it caught up under there. Been there, done that, don't do it. The other thing is note, your edges do not all match. So don't worry about it. The comment I made was your salvages and your width of fabric is going to be different, which is why I found it very helpful to mark the middle of my fabric and use that as the starting point to put all my fabrics together rather than trying to match up the salvages. Okay, now this next piece, stay with me here. First time I read instructions to do this, I went, huh? How's that gonna work? Is that gonna work? It's gonna work. Okay, take your primary fabric, your main fabric, and we just roll it up a bit. I just roll it up, roll it up, roll it up. I don't know, about there, okay? Basically, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our cuff fabric and we're gonna roll it over and match our middle, and this is why I had you mark the middle of your cuff fabric on both the top and the bottom, because we want to bring this up and match it to the middle up here. And we're going to pin this together, making sure that you keep your middle fabric, your main fabric, out of the way. So we're going to just wrap this up and pin it. And then, in this case, we are going to stitch it a 1/2 an inch, not the usual 1/4 inch. So we're going to pin this all the way down on both sides. And this is why I sewed the first set of fabrics together, because if you try and pin them and then pin this on top of it, you're gonna poke yourself and jab yourself. It's just not gonna work. So go through and finish pinning rest of them, making sure you keep this middle fabric tucked out of the way and in there. And no worries, this is gonna work when all gets said and done. So I'm gonna finish by pinning, and then I'm gonna sew my seam 1/2 an inch. I know this is unusual. What I do is I switch to a foot. I usually use a 1/4 inch foot. I switch to an open-toed foot, and then on my sewing machine, I have blue painter's tape in the front of the foot that's on the bed of my sewing machine. And there I have a 1/4 inch mark, and then next to that, I have a 1/2 inch mark. That way, as I feed my fabric through the sewing machine, I can keep this edge straight with a 1/2 an inch, because otherwise the edge of your foot is not going to help you a lot. Now that I have my 1/2 inch seam done, no ironing involved, this is where some magic happens, because I'll admit, when I first was doing this, I'm like, I don't know about this, but it works. Now, all we're going to do is turn this inside out. So just grab a hold of your cuff and just roll it. And then as you go along, push the inside out. Pretty soon, you'll be able to get a little bit more of it, and then just keep pulling on the cuff at the same time you're pulling lightly on the main fabric with your other hand. Yep, that's all it takes, is to pull this inside out. You just keep doing this. Be careful. You don't want to be rough with it. It will come out. There we go. Look at there. Look at there. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All right. A little bit more. All right. There we go. We've got it all the way out. And look at this. It worked. Sure enough, you have your cuff on the top and your little accent piece underneath it. Okay, at this point in time, I like to go and press this and have this nice and neat. And then, oops, I got some threads there. We'll tug on the threads, get those cleaned up. And then, and then we're going to fold this in half and get it squared up and move on to the next step. Now that I've got my cuff all nice and pressed, key thing when you press it, yes, press it with this side and get it nice and clean there, but also turn it over and make sure it's nice and pressed over here and you don't have it folded over weird. So press it nicely on both sides. Doesn't that look great? Oh, this is gonna be such a pretty pillow. I'm gonna love it. Okay, we have a few more steps, but we're getting very close to being done. Okay, now, this is another one of those leap of faith. We're going to take our pillowcase, and because I had pretty much marked my center anyway of the cuff based on my salvages, I can safely fold it in half based on those cuff salvages. I get it, the rest of these down here may not necessarily match. So there's my center. And then what I do is I hold it up and I want it to lay, it's hard to show here on the camera, but basically I want it to, see if I can do this. As I'm holding it up on the top, I want it to be nice and neat at the bottom there also. So what I'm gonna do is I can do this here on my table. So basically you're going to put wrong sides together. I know, because what we're gonna do, and you're not cutting off your salvages. Don't worry about that. And then I'm gonna press it out here, get my edges, and then I'm gonna fold this up here so you can see what I'm doing at the other end. I basically get it down here and make sure I have a nice at the bottom. So I'm gonna flip it over so you can see that there. My bottom should be nice and even also. So here's what you just need to do. You need to kind of hold it up, make sure your edges are good, and then pin it. Yep, so I'm gonna stretch this back out. Stretch this back out. Make sure everything is nice and neat. My cuff is straight at the top. I've got my middle. Don't worry about your edges being even. Those are funky salvages. As long as it's folded center and your sides, your top is straight and your bottom is straight even. If these sides aren't, that's okay. Now, what we're going to do is, now that you've put these wrong sides together, we're going to sew the sides and the bottom. So basically the two edges that are still raw edges, sew about 1/8 of an inch, or a little more if you'd like. And then what we're gonna do, we're gonna flip it out and we're gonna do something basically called a French seam. And this way, even on the inside, you are not gonna have any raw edges. Yep, no raw edges. So stay with me here And we're gonna do this. If you've got yours where it's really, really off on your edges here, but your top and your bottom are good, then go ahead. Sometimes what I'll do is I may trim up, square up. Show you what I'm doing here. Square up from the bottom and trim off that salvage. And that way it's easier to get my, so right now it looks like, oh, I've got a little bit off there. There we go. That just evens up my edges. And so when I do my 1/8 of an inch seam, I've got that all in there, and I know I'm also going to eventually get this all cleaned up when we do the next seam. There we go. This is probably the trickiest part, is once you've got the top done, is to square it all up and get this 1/8 of an inch seam done next. But it's not that bad. As I got to the sewing machine, I realized there was one other thing to mention. Sometimes your salvages, your width of your fabric is quite a bit off on your fabrics. And in this case, as I got to the sewing machine, I realized mine was. My accent fabric is in no way as wide as the other fabric. So we've got quite a bit of an adjustment there. Therefore, there's no way, even doing this French seam method, that that seam is going to get caught up in there. So that's when we do a little trimming. Now, the goal was to sew 1/8 of an inch, and then we were going to sew another 1/2 inch seam after that. So let's look at it. That meant, you know, not quite an inch. So I might have been okay on this, but maybe not. So what I do then is I get out, and I've never had a problem before where I've trimmed and squared up my fabric to ensure that I was going to have enough of a seam to catch that last salvage in. So in this case, I think I'm going to want to, let's see, 1/2 an inch plus 1/8, not quite 3/4. Yeah, I'm going to want to cut off at least 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my ruler, and I'm gonna do it this way with a square ruler, because what I can do then is keep more of it square at the top. And I'm gonna take this little puppy here and go, okay, I wanna trim off about 1/4 of an inch. Whoops. Yep, 1/4 of an inch. And then I can move this up next to it. And it's gonna be really hard to show it here and still do it. But hopefully you get the gist of it, that I'm gonna keep this square and trim off 1/4 of an inch. Therefore, making sure that once we do my last seams, I'm getting that last salvage caught up in there. Because the last thing I want is to see a little bit of that white salvage on my pillowcase. That would make me very, very sad. And then it'd be a pain in the butt to fix it. So we're gonna do a little trimming, and then I'm gonna go back, repin, and do my 1/8 of an inch seam all the way around. Then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, I have my seam done. Yep, and don't panic. Because if you flip it, because right now you're going, well, okay, we got a problem here. I got my seam, I can still see some white stuff, and gee whiz, how's this gonna work? Because we have one more step to do. Okay, I went a little wider and went closer to 1/4 of an inch to make sure I could take care of my little salvage there. No worries. We are now going to turn this inside out for the final step. And this is what we call a French seam. At least that's what my mother always used to call it. And I also, at this point in time, I take it to the sewing machine. And you're gonna realize you're gonna have quite a bit of bulk right here where your cuff meets. So just be very careful with that as you do things. The other thing is, unlike quilting where we generally don't do backstitching, with this you want to do backstitching. When I sewed the previous seam, which I'm not going to flip it back out the other way, I started at the end, went to the corner, and then went up. So I ended at the cuff. As thick as this cuff is, it's a real bugger if you try and start there and doing a backstitch. So I backstitched at the very start of the corner, went the edge and came out, and then I got close to the end and I backstitched and then finished it off and sewed that up. Okay, so I am going to go and press this, because what we're going to do is you're going to want to press your seams out nice and neat, almost as if you're finishing it. And then we're going to take it back to the sewing machine one more time, and you're going to stitch, a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. I'm going to lean towards a 1/2 inch for me particularly, because right now I still see quite a bit of my salvage. If I look on the other side, I still have quite a bit of a salvage. So I'm going to want to make sure I'm stitching enough of my seam such that I will get that encased in it. And sure enough, if I do a 1/2 inch, all of this will get caught up in my seam. And then it will be all finished. So I'm going to go press it. You can do that too, get yours pressed. And then if you want to pin it to keep everything nice and straight, do that. And then you're going to stitch all the way around, basically the same 2 sides. You only need to do this on the 2 sides that we were dealing with the raw edges, from the cuff to the bottom over to the other corner. About, probably, I would go a 1/2 inch. And I have yet to have a problem going a little bit more and not having my pillow fit in. So give it a try. So we'll see how it works out. Okay, all done. Now, the purple thing is very handy for, as you flip it around, getting in your corners to make sure your corners are nice and straight on both ends before you start sewing. What I did is started at this corner, I sewed down and then up, because ending with the cuff is so much easier than starting with the cut. Let me tell you. Now, sometimes here, there's a lot of bulk. I'm just gonna tell you. So sometimes it's like, don't break a needle, stop before it, stop after it, and maybe do a little bit of handwork in there just to keep that nice and tacked down. Then flip it inside out. Let's see. Did we make sure we lost our salvages? Sure enough, look at there. No salvages. Hoo-hoo-hoo. So I did a 1/2 inch. And now at the bottom, I did a 1/2 inch also, but if I was worried about the length, I easily could have just done a 1/4 inch on the bottom. It wouldn't have mattered because that was just raw seams. So basically what you've got is you have a finished seam in the inside. It's finished. There's no raw edges at all. And then on the outside, it looks like a nice finished pillowcase. And you only have a seam on 2 sides, this side and at the bottom. This other side is, well, it's the fabric because you use the full width of fabric. And there we go. I have a finished pillowcase. And I'm gonna go double check. I'm gonna be back in a minute so I can show you that yes, even though I made my seam pretty significant and I cut off some of that in order to get the salvage, that the pillow does fit. Well, I told you I was going to confirm that the king-size pillow did fit in this pillowcase, even though I did take a pretty significant 1/2 inch, well, a 1/4 inch first and then another 1/2 inch. Good thing I didn't make a liar out of myself. The king-size pillow fits. Yep, so there's my king-size pillow. Here's the top of it. So as you can see, you have plenty of room, almost the full cuff. So there's plenty of room at the bottom. So if you have to do a 1/2 inch in the bottom, you're fine. And look, there's plenty of room on the side too. I don't know if that's really obvious, but I had no problems getting this pillow into the pillowcase. It was not a tight fit. So key thing is go with it. If you're making some of these for other people, try making one for yourself first. You know, make yourself comfortable with it, with how it works, and the fact that, you know what, you're good with that salvage and you're able to play with it a little bit there. And yeah. Oh, the other thing is, as you put your pieces together to sew your seam, you're going to want to keep an eye that your accents and your cuffs match up here. Mine fabulously match perfectly, which was wonderful because otherwise it'd be kind of embarrassing. But as you put your sides together, make sure you keep an eye on that as well, and then you're going to be good. And these are so much fun to make. And you know what? 100% cotton quilt fabric. These are nice and comfy to sleep on too. Hope you enjoyed it. Go find some fun fabric and make yourself some sets of pillowcases. Take care and have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single video I published, hit the subscribe button below and then hit the bell icon. And that way you will be notified whenever I publish a new video. But you can also find me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Wendy, the initial J, Haney. Or I have a Facebook group for those of you that love quilting, needlework, books, wine, and wellness. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/lifefulfilled. The name of the group is Life Fulfilled Quilting, Needlework, Books, Wine, and Wellness. You can also find me over on my website, wendyjhaney.com. I will be doing more blogging over there eventually. As I get more of my videos done, I'll be blogging about those. But also, maybe you see some things that I'm making here and you're going, ooh, wow, I just don't want to make that myself. Well, a lot of those products will end up over there on the website that you can purchase for your friends and family. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you watching.